of the collections of evidence, the mathematics collection is the most primarily accessed due to math being the subject of the state assessment that the most students fail to meet standard on. And now I'll hand over the presentation to my colleague Andrew.
Just to follow up with Holly's question on level 2, the reason it didn't show up on that previous chart is that level 2 students are placed into that track through their IEP process, and they are that threshold is set for them in advance of taking the HSPE or one of the assessments. And the collections of evidence requires that, or the other alternatives require that student fail or not pass the regular high school proficiency exams before they can access an option, whereas the level 2 is designed in advance of taking that test.
Okay. Hang on, everybody. I understand there's a need to find out things. When I first came on the board, there was a lot of this. Presentations were made, and boom, boom, pretty soon everybody's in the middle of asking questions. I thought in the last presentation that really worked well. But I would like to keep any questions right now just to clarification points, if we can do that, and broader discussion to come at the end of the presentation. So, Connie, did you have a clarification?
Yes, what is level 2? I think of level 2 as being in the range of 1 to 4 and SBAC, but that's not what you're talking about, right?
Level 2 is what was referenced in the old HSPE assessment system. It's achievement level 2, so it's students reaching the basic level, and it's reserved for special ed students receiving special services, and it specifically allows for them to meet that requirement at a lower threshold than a regular education student.
So, did you have a clarification question, Holly? Okay, thank you. All right, continue.
Thank you. So before we do hear from the Vancouver staff, let's look at a little bit of outcome data on the COEs. Basically, who's accessing the COEs and how are they doing on that? So let's take a quick look. So who takes advantage of the collections of evidence? This chart shows participation rates on the collection of evidence in comparison to the proportion of various races and ethnicities in the state. So the point here of this slide is that the students who access the collection of evidence are those that have failed the high school proficiency exams at least once. So if you know who fails the test, you have a pretty good idea of who's going to be accessing the collections of evidence. So in this case, this is for the most recent data that we received from OSPI. And basically it shows you that, for example, Black and Hispanic students, collectively they make up about 25% of the student population, but they account for about 50% of the collections of evidence. People shown in green access the collections at about the rate that you would expect them to, or a little bit below the rate. And those that show up in red, a little bit higher rate than what you might expect.
We have a clarification question, Holly.
So I'm curious, are these numbers and the previous slide that showed CIA, CAA alternatives and stuff, is that just for the current class of seniors, or is that taking into account the kids that are no longer enrolled by their senior year?
Thank you, and that would be a reminder for all of us to specify which group that we are looking at here. So, and we will be looking at some different sort of looks at the collections of evidence. This is for the last year, 2013-14, I'm sorry, 2014-15, and collections of evidence happens twice a year. So the counts here represent the total number of collections submitted for scoring last year. So it might include duplicate counts where a student submitted a collection in February. If it was not, if it didn't meet the standard, then the student would re-enroll for the class and possibly submit it again in June. So one student could have two submissions per year. So this number here just counts up the total number of submissions, comes up with an average, and we know that they participate at about twice the rate of their average.
And the previous slide, the one where it says alternative options accessed, is that just looking at the currently enrolled senior class, or does that go back and account for students that are no longer enrolled by their senior year?
For the alternative options access over 3 years, this is the number of students accessing an alternative regardless of cohort in a given year. So this is from the OSPI legislative report that gives you numbers on the options access each year. So you're looking at somewhat different data sets in Andrew's analysis from mine.
So you're going to hear us saying that the pass rates on the collection of evidences are pretty high. You're going to see some evidence of that. And that's, for the most part, true. But you're going to see a little bit lower pass rates on the biology collections. And we'll talk about that in just a little bit. But this schematic shows why the pass rates are relatively high for the collections of evidence. You've heard me say that collections are submitted, scored, and if they don't meet a minimum cut score, then they can be supplemented or augmented, resubmitted, and this process can go on and on over the course of several semesters in a similar fashion to the way our high school proficiency exams allow retake or retest for students that don't meet standard. So over the course of a 2-year period, on the far left, you see the cohort pursuing a collection of evidence option, and that would just simply represent all the students that are enrolled in the collections. And I'm showing you, the numbers I'm showing on the screen are for the reading collections over the past year, over the past couple of years. So for the reading collections, after being enrolled in the collections course for one semester, many kids will submit their collections, and from the starting cohort, about 78% of these will pass after one semester. They will have met the standard to demonstrate their reading ability, and then they have met the graduation requirement and will move on. But there's about 22% don't meet standard, and they're going to enroll for the course again, the collections course, and then they're going to submit their collections the following June, and then roughly half of those will pass that. And you can see for the average student in high school that enrolls in a collections course after taking the 10th grade HSPE, they have basically two full years or 4 different semesters in which to enroll for the collections and ultimately meet standard. So by this process of resubmitting, rescoring, by the end of that 2-year period, just about all students that were enrolled in the reading collections from that year, just about all of them pass. So let's take a look at some real outcome data. So this table shows pass rates for 12th graders in the class of 2013. And we can see that, and this is for the math end of course year 1 collection of evidence. So you can see in the class of 2013, 12th graders, there were a little over 3,300, almost 3,400 students were actually enrolled in the collections at some point in their high school career. So this represents, these high pass rates represent similar to what you just saw on the chart, the previous chart. This represents maybe 2 years of work for students. And it shows that after being involved in the collections, once they're enrolled and once they stick with the collections, there's a pretty high likelihood that they will pass.
Point of information, go ahead.
Same question, because a couple years ago, actually a year ago, I tried to look at this data and I ran into a problem, and maybe you're looking at it differently or being able to interpret things that I couldn't figure out. But the problem that I ran into is that the numbers, by the time students got into senior years, all I could see were the currently enrolled seniors. So when you follow that cohort, and I would have had to go back and like track each individual kid to see if they were actually still in the cohort. It's reported as a percentage of the currently enrolled cohort. So when you're tracking that cohort, are you saying that if there was 70 unique kids in the cohort, we're looking at what happened, that 99% of those 70 unique kids actually passed that COE? Because that doesn't make sense. To me, it seems like a lot of kids enrolled in the COE would, in their junior year, would by senior year no longer be in that senior cohort.
This is a cohort that came from a student level file, and these are students that remained in the cohort at the end of the school year.
So it doesn't account for the kids that weren't part of the cohort anymore.
May I?
Yeah. You see where I'm
Oh,
struggling
yeah,
with
no,
this?
we
Sorry.
actually,
Okay, sorry.
we actually specifically discussed this in our dry run. So gentlemen, this is the question about, is this data a reflection of who submitted and actually got did not pass on the collection, right, versus the number of kids who may have initially submitted a collection and then subsequently as seniors passed, whether they stayed in school or not, right? And I think there's a later slide, if I recall, that clarifies that.
I think so.
Yes.
Yeah. And I guess the way you're saying it, this is part of the cohort. These are students in the cohort, and they do represent the work of those students, at any point through their 4-year high school career.
So 99% of students that take a particular COE end up passing via the COE by their senior year.
Maybe it'd be easier if he was allowed to go to the slide.
Yeah, I would say at this point, let's continue on. We understand what the question is. We can come and revisit it once you've gotten through that point. So go ahead, Andrew.
So this is a summary slide showing, this is not the cohort that we were just referring to, but this is basically 1 year's worth of submissions, 2014-15, last year's school year. This shows the 4 different collection of evidences, and then this shows the pass rate on those collections. Again, anything shown in red would be below the state average, anything in green would be close to the state average or above it. And these numbers do not reflect the high pass rates you saw on the previous slide. These are the submissions, the total number of submissions over 2014-15 school year. So for example, a student may have submitted a reading collection in February and did not pass, so that would be counted as a fail. But then they might have resubmitted it in June and they would have passed it. So that would mean that a single student could have 1 fail and 1 submission, or 1 fail, 1 pass, which would make the pass rate of 50%. So when you see these numbers here, it reflects the total number of submissions, not necessarily a student's cumulative work over a 2-year period like you saw in the previous slide. So this points to a case that we discussed briefly, the lower pass rate on the biology collections. And we're going to look at the math and the biology a little bit more closely here. So this is the math collection of evidence for 2014-15. And you can see the pass rate and number of students, the pass rate by in comparison to the state average, and some race ethnicities are a little bit below average, some a little bit higher than average, but overall pretty high pass rate on the collections last year. This is the same sort of chart for the biology collections. And you see here considerably lower pass rate for the biology collections. When I talked to some OSPI folks on Monday, they gave me a couple of explanations for why the biology might be a little bit lower than, or quite a bit lower than the other content areas. And I did see Mike Middleton back here, so if you had some very specific questions about why the biology end of course would be, or the collection would be lower, he might offer a little bit of insight. But in the conversations I've had with him and one of his co-workers, the collections process is, as they refer to it, some of the answers, just, some of the answer documents just aren't, really thought out the way some of the other collections are. And quite frankly, I hear, we're told that the student performance on the biology collections is just not commensurate with what they're seeing in the other content areas. And Mike might be able to explain a little bit more. So, I do hope you have a little bit better idea about the collections. The collections are really important to a lot of students. A lot of students use these as alternatives to the high school testing requirements. In effect, thousands of students use these each year and pass them to meet the testing requirements. So before moving forward with Mr. Goforth and Ms. Harding, we will take some clarifying questions, or if you like, we can go straight into their presentation and answer the collections collectively at the end, whatever you may think.
If we have a couple of questions now that you'd like to ask of the two up here, I have a couple of questions myself, but I just go ahead.
I'm still kind of confused about the numbers because I'm looking at back on the slide, our COE pass rate's high, and the slide showing that by the time senior year, 99% of students in a cohort that took a COE in their, that pursued the COE option, 99% of them had passed the COE. And my question was, is that 99% of the ones that are still engaged in the cohort, or is that the entire beginning cohort? And I guess it just doesn't make sense to me because if it was the entire beginning cohort, that means between junior and senior year, only 1% of students involved in the alternative route option dropped out. And that doesn't make any sense to me, I'm sorry. So I just have a really hard time believing. So I think it was frustrating to me. I guess I'm reflecting my frustration, and I'm happy to work and just clarify it for myself, but I continue to think that we can't get a good look at the data. I think the number of students not making it based on testing is masked because we can't, at least I couldn't figure out a way to follow an actual cohort. I'm only seeing testing data for the kids that haven't already dropped out by the time they're in their senior year. And this just kind of confirmed that for me because I'm just looking at it going like logically, I can't see that kids in an alternative route, only 1% of them are dropping out between their junior and senior year. That just doesn't make sense.
Cindy, I know you had your hand up earlier. Okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'll address my issue.
Go ahead.
Ever so briefly, as I'm getting a clearer picture about Holly's question, these are students that have not yet dropped out. So if there's 5,000 or 6,000 students might have dropped out in any given cohort, they are not reflected in this picture unless they dropped out after they submitted their stuff last year. So if they would have submitted their collections last year, then they would be reflected in here.
Between junior and senior year, the dropouts are subtracted from the conversation. Right, so they took it, they submitted a COE in their senior year, some number of them didn't pass it, and then we're looking again at the ones that submit again in their senior year, whether they passed it. But the students that dropped out, I mean, it doesn't make sense to me because I know anecdotally that, I mean, a chunk of kids drop out between junior and senior year.
Right,
So, but we're not seeing those dropouts in the data we're looking at.
That's right, and it's just impossible to say, I mean, so if your data point is, what is the percentage of kids that pass the COE, that leads you to one set of data. If the question is, how many kids drop out, irregardless of their status with the COE, that's a different analysis, right?
It is, and my concern is that it masks a true look at how our testing results, either via passing the test itself or passing an alternative, how are they impacting our dropout rates? We can't see it because we're not looking at the dropouts, only the kids that are continuing to be successful.
They're only looking at pass rates for COE, and I get that that's.
Okay, sorry, that's.
No, I had two very quick questions. On your last couple of slides where you broke down the ethnic groups, is there a way, or can we know from this where poverty was a factor, free and reduced lunch with this group? Or can you?
I can do that. I don't have that on the slide.
At some point, I'd like to see that as a follow-up. And the other question I have, maybe our guests will be better, well, are equally equipped to answer it, is I want to understand why the grade in the cohort option is not selected by as many students as others, and maybe there are others, you know, where you can, when you can look at your options, and these are the different ways, and one of those is your GPA compared to your cohort. I don't know if there's an answer for that. Yeah, I know Holly probably, because Holly, it actually a lot of it was stimulated by what you said a few meetings back. You had a kid who was a B student and had taken, I don't know how many times the COE, and just missed it by a point. I'm like, what's the problem here?
And he graduated simultaneously from high school and his AA from Running Start. I was trying to keep him from having to come back from Running Start to do a COE.
So I just don't know enough about it, and that's why I asked the question.
So I put a slide up here for you. This shows the, you can see the free and reduced lunch students, how they, what their pass rates are on the collections in comparison to the other groups.
Right. And I did see, I did see that earlier. And I was just thinking if it could be, yeah, I was just thinking about overlay. Okay, thank you on that. All right. Oh, okay. Jeff, you're up.
You said you might elaborate about the biology COE that you typically low score, or Mike. Could you do that?
I hate to put Mike on the spot, but he really is the expert here.
So Andrew did come and chat with myself and STEM department about the numbers behind the biology, and I was reflecting on the information we shared then on my drive down. Two elements. One is a perception on our part. We obviously can't validate some of that. The other is anecdotal from the experience of processing the biology collections. The biology and collection, as well as all the other content areas, are effectively 100% a constructive response assessment, meaning the students have to not just check it for a correct answer, they're actually developing answers and responses for their items. So the nature of what has been seen in the 2 or 3 cycles of the biology collection are the responses, as Andrew kind of intimated, they're not commensurate with the quality that we're seeing in some of the other content areas. And so this is where the anticipation or perception of what might be as the struggle. These students have effectively not met standard on the main assessment, so they're already a group of students who have been struggling with the content, and then possibly continuing to struggle trying to internalize the information and the standards and the learning so that they can express themselves on this 100% constructive response assessment in an effective manner to find success through that. And I don't know if data has been shared previously. We're at high success rates now with the now what I'll refer to as the English language arts combinations for our collections and our math. But I don't know if those were the same success rates when we started. And And so, again, it's kind of a growth opportunity within the nature of the assessment design itself. So, is that?
Thank you. Let's move on to our guests so that they have some time.
Well, I'll reintroduce myself. I'm Brian Goforth, Assessment Director for Evergreen Public Schools in Vancouver. This is only my second year as Assessment Director, but I've been handling state testing since Wausau Pilots, so I've been around a while. Sitting next to me is Allison Harding, who's an Associate Principal at Heritage High School in our district, and behind me are Michelle Folsom, our Assessment Specialist, and Andrew Wooster, an Administrative Intern. So thank you for inviting us to speak today, and we hope that what we have to share will be useful to you. If you take a look at the screen, you can see that in terms of the number of students that we serve, we're the 5th largest school district in the state. Currently, we have a little over 9,000 high school students and a little over 2,000 seniors. Our present graduation rate is 83%. And here's some data on COE submissions that took place in our district last year and this year. Currently, we are serving 136 students across our district in English language arts, or English collection of evidence, and 177 in math collection of evidence. We are not offering any science collection of evidence right now because science is no longer a graduation requirement for the class of 2016. Last year, you can see our data, 98 kids submitted a reading COE, and there's a percentage of those who passed. 62 writing, 220 math. You can see that our data coincides with what he was speaking about, that math is the largest COE accepts, and 171 science COE submitted last year, and with, again, a little lower success rate. Overall, though, kids taking the COE, it gives them a chance to graduate when they pass. You know, a lot of kids still have other issues. They may be deficient credit, there may be other things that they haven't met, but it gets them over one of those humps, and the hump can be really big for them for a lot of reasons. Some of them really struggle to sit down and take a comprehensive assessment that's going to take them 2 or more hours to complete. Whereas the COE assessments, the kids are given a chunk of standards, or instructed on a chunk of standards and targets, and they're allowed to be assessed that, and then they move to another chunk. And so they don't have to take the entire thing all at once. And for kids who maybe have test anxiety, that's a huge stress relief. And because they're getting focused and scaffolding and individualized instruction, it really helps them build their skills before they have to sit down and assess. Just a few other things that I wanted to add. In Evergreen, we run collection of evidence as a class during the school day, and there are separate classes for each of the content areas. Like I said, we're not offering science at the present time because the fall semester is usually devoted to making sure our seniors who need a collection class can access that. Allison will talk about some of the struggles we have with that in a few minutes. Students formerly just got elective credit for being in a COA class, but now we can award them credit recovery or elective if they don't need credit recovery. Right now, some of the work is done online, some of the work is paper pencil. With the new format that's coming out, most of the work will be online, except for some mathematical graphing problems. They'll have to submit hard copies to the state. The COE website is what our collection of evidence teachers access for training, for guidelines, for materials, for practice tasks and scenarios, and things that they need to help the kids prepare their own collections. The teacher's responsibility is to teach the students the skills and standards that they need in order to pass the test, and then they also receive training on proper administration, and the website provides them with guidelines, policies, and test securities. Collections, as he said, can be submitted twice a year, this year, January, and in June. The students that are planning a January submission, they're using the old format, which is still based on the old Washington standards, and then the second semester with the new format that'll be based on the new Common Core standards. They have to submit work samples. Some are over time that they can work on over days. Others are on-demand samples, which they have to sit and do in one sitting. There's inclusion banks that they can choose from, so there is some choice in the work that they're going to do to present to the state. And again, biology remains the same format. There's not a new format for biology until new standards are adopted. My department, the assessment department, our job is monitoring and checking for eligibility, distributing information around the district to teachers about the trainings and the proper procedures. We provide training when needed, and we also provide technical support to help them access the state website. And the last thing I want to say before turning it over to Allison is that even kids who are in COE, we still encourage them to take the state assessments and the retake opportunities because in many cases, there's several months have passed from the time that they've taken the previous assessment until it's time to take the next one. And whether in the regular core class or in collection of evidence, kids are still acquiring skills. And we do see that kids, even after being in COE, end up passing the regular state assessments in their retake. I think that's about all I have to say right now. So thank you, and here's Allison.
All right, hello. So as Brian said, COE is a class at our school. We're currently running reading, writing, and math. We had a science COE class last year. Obviously, the graduation requirements changed for this year's graduating seniors, so we're not running that class right now, but we will again in the future. So I just want to talk briefly about who we place in the COE. So we usually let them, you have to have attempted and failed a test to qualify, so we usually let them attempt and fail as many times as they can through the first semester of their junior year. Usually in September or August, once we get our test scores back, we run reports and we look through, we pull out students who would qualify for a level 2 pass, we pull out students who would qualify for the developmentally appropriate, the DATE proficiency exam. And we pull out students who don't qualify, and the rest of them, we prioritize seniors and try to push them into a COE class the fall of their senior year. I think that waiting till their senior year puts a little more seriousness into the COE. It's hard for students to want to take this class because, of course, they're not taking a class that they love and are passionate about. So we usually put them in their senior year. And if we have enough spaces, we add juniors in, but we prioritize mostly seniors. We also do independent studies for students. So in the past several years, we've done independent studies for students who just can't fit it into their schedule, and they'll come in 7th period, and we pay teachers to work with them outside of class. I'm going to pass out here a math COE task, mirror task they're called, and talk a little bit about what the classroom looks like. So the COE classroom is very differentiated. There are students, we have classes that are like from 15 students to 30 students. They're all at different tasks, different places. They're all working on different tasks, and they all have different lagging skills. So it's a difficult class to teach and meet the needs of all students. The packet that I'm handing out is an example of a math lesson that scaffolds up to a specific math task. So the teacher, this is just a snapshot of the COE website, and this is the math 1. So what the teacher does is they customize a little schedule for each student. So each math student needs to produce 6 to 8 of these tasks, 2 of them on demand. And so each standard needs to be represented twice. So the teacher will work with the student. There is some, choice involved, but the teacher will steer the student into a particular group of tasks. And then they work through these lessons that they're called mirror tasks because they mirror the standards that will be represented on the COE. So with my really skilled teachers who have been at this a while, we have really great results. The data that I showed in the beginning are pass rates. Those are pass rates. That doesn't include the students who are actually in the class but they don't submit. That's just the pass rates of submitted COEs. So Math, which is our most successful area, is at 99. Science is lower. So, just a couple of challenges. I think the biggest two challenges that I see just from a building perspective are one, meeting the needs of our ELL students. So it's not surprising to see that data of the high percentage of Hispanic students enrolled in this, because they are able to, not for the on-demand tests, but for the general class, they're able to have the same accommodations that they would in any other classroom. So if they're having language problems, they might have a staff assistant in there helping them work through packets like this. So ELL students are helped a lot by this process. The English is also hard though, because they don't receive the accommodations while they're doing their writing tasks. And then science is obviously a place where we have really low numbers as well. And my perception on the science is that students have 2 years of required science classes, and they take physics, and then they take biology their sophomore year. They're usually in this class as a senior, so it's been 2 years since they've been in biology class, and it's really hard for them to be successful. That's why I think our class model is so great, because you actually have a teacher there instructing you and scaffolding the lessons for you and working on the standards with you. Any questions you have, we'd be happy to answer.
Anybody want to jump in? Okay, fine.
So is there a diagnosis with each student about which areas they failed from the SBAC or the HISB? What are the weaknesses that they had, and then what did they not get, for instance, in math?
So, when we do get test scores back, there is strand data that you can look at and see which areas students are weak in math.
So is the instruction tailored toward those areas where they're deficient?
So
or is it just you start over from scratch?
So each student, regardless of how they performed on the state testing, they do need to meet like 2 of the strands for each standard in their portfolio submission. So I think each task, as they work on it, is, the instruction is tailored to how the students are doing on the prep work and the mirror tasks. So if I see that Brian's really struggling on one mirror task, then I can look at his practice work and really help him before he goes to the computer to start his COE.
Oh.
So I'm just thinking about the science specifically, and the question I think also would maybe be pertinent to the ELA and math too. But last year you did staff a science collection of evidence.
Last year we did, yes.
Yeah, do you know how many students you had in that?
About 25 probably.
So you had 0.15 teacher FTE or something. How many? Were all 25 of those students in one class, or did you have it separated?
We had 2 sections, fall and spring.
You had 2 sections.
Yeah.
So
0.2.
0.2 of a teacher. So when you're not staffing the collection of evidence this year for science, what is that 0.2 teacher now doing instead? And when you have to staff, if the biology doesn't change, if you have to staff COE again next year, what will you lose that you have this year to do that?
So that's a great question. FTE and staffing is definitely a challenge. And we try to project how many sections we'll need based on numbers in, March, but we really don't know their test scores until August. So we are taking FTE out of probably a general biology class. It comes somewhere else from science. So right now we have that teacher teaching a general biology class. In our district, we recently adopted a policy that the COE class will count for a credit recovery credit in the content area, which has really helped a lot of kids. So it's possibly pulling them out of a credit recovery like PEAK or Aventa. It could potentially be pulling them out of retaking a class they attempted and failed.
And so when a teacher is teaching a general biology class now and they're not teaching it next year, all the other general biology teachers just have higher class sizes. Those kids get redistributed. That's what happens.
That is what happens, yes.
See?
So the students who are taking the collection of evidence class, they've failed the other assessments how many times?
Once. But the minimum to,
Well,
I mean, that's.
I know
oh,
the minimum, but in your experience, realistically, to get into your senior class, your fall senior COE, how many times have I taken the general assessment and failed it?
Probably 5. I think the students who, we see a lot of students who maybe were disengaged in school for a while. A lot of times I have students who I really want to put in a COE class, but they don't even meet that taken and fail requirement. Either because they've moved around a lot, or they've had family issues, or they have just been disengaged from school, now they're back, they really want to get serious. But I mean, I think in general, probably 4 to 6.
And how close are they to passing the general assessment?
So we put students in, and we don't, you know, I mean, I know some of them have a level 1, and some of them have a level 2 that you can see from their testing, but we just put them all in the COE. We don't just allow like a level 2 to go into a COE class. We would allow anyone to go in. I actually think, I mean, sometimes a level 1 student can really benefit from that kind of intensive instruction and maybe, you know, rise to passing the COE. So if somebody was really close, I would hold off on putting them in until their senior year for sure, hoping that they would pass the test.
And then I guess my last question is, the students who are not passing, are they in a 5-year graduation track? Are they going into an alternative high school setting?
Well, we have.
What are we doing for them?
So we have, I mean, we try to retain all our kids at our school and get them to graduate in their 5th year. So that is something that we look at this, I mean, when we're doing forecasting with the counselors for the fall of senior year, we'll say who on here is not graduating this year. That might be a person that we would not prioritize putting in class, that we would prioritize them getting into our credit recovery program, making up more credits, and then attempting the following year. So we try to retain all our students in building. I mean, we do have a couple of alternative programs in our district, but we find a lot more student success in our building. So.
Yeah. Randy, microphone, please. Randy, microphone. Thank you.
It looks as though that math is kind of an issue compared to some of the others. That's the main one. Do you think it will have, in your professional expertise and the students that you deal with that tend to come this way, there's now this 3rd math credit. Mm-hmm. So it's possible before you see them, they could have an extra year of math. Mm-hmm. Okay. So these kids that seem to struggle with math, I think the idea is they move even to a higher math. Mm-hmm. You know, and there might be some failure issues or struggling issues with that. Do you think it's going to be a help, or do you think you're going to see the same number of students? Because it's not just passing the COE now, it's getting enough math credits to actually graduate.
I mean, I think that an extra year of math is, I mean, I think to have the content fresh in your memory only helps you on either the testing or the COE. So, I mean, in that way, I think it's good to have a 3rd year of math because you're still thinking about algebraic concepts, you know. So that's what I would say.
I just add to that, I think it'll be interesting as the SBAC and the requirement of not taking a test until the junior year, as that comes into play, how that will affect the number of kids that we need to put into a COE class. And I kind of reflect back to all the doom and gloom on how badly kids, especially in the lower grades, were going to perform on the SBAC, and it didn't come out nearly as bad as was predicted.
No, it actually came out better than just about, basically 3 through 8 were by far the best, so it's interesting. So as far as the COE goes, you put in so many kids into the state, and it seems like you have a really high percentage rate.
You mean in terms of successful submissions?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, and we know it kind of depends on the quality of the teacher. Okay, so kid gets a great quality teacher, thumbs up. Gets a new teacher, kind of a tough deal. We really found that out in a couple districts this year. So we sometimes have this discussion. So you're counting it as a credit. So it's a class, and we count it as a credit. You get a credit. One of the proposals out there is if you don't pass, you take a class and you get a credit, and then you would pass and graduate. Kind of what we're telling them they got to do. The only thing we're leaving off is there's an expense for most districts, and we even propose this to legislators, that you qualify as an expert school in getting students passed. So if you can meet like a 90% pass rate, that you are now an expert, and we only have to take samplings of your kids' work as opposed to doing every single kid, because there's an expense of doing every single kid. So really this whole delink thing, I kind of laugh about it in my own mind, because you have a cut score, but you delinked it because you gave them the COE to do, which is a course, which is what I'm proposing. If you think of it one way, it is, and you think of it another way, it's not. Because you're still saying you have to score X, or we're going to tell you you have to take a course that's going to help you in your performance in language, arts, or math. Their course would be take the COE, or I would hope there's enough flexibility that if it's a math course, they could take something that are like carpentry or construction, and it would have a math component, and it would help the kid in their life. So I think we get so hung up on the words of link and delink and whether they're taking a test and it's high stakes or not high stakes. We're pretty close to the system, just that we put so much emphasis on it that we're all so freaked out about it that if we would take the pressure off and the kids didn't have to take it to graduate, that everything would go away. But I think you still have to have a standard of rigor to actually make the graduation actually worth something of value going forward. So I think the system you have is a high quality system. Kids don't make it. And if we can keep them to their senior year, you ensure that they have a high quality program that gives them skills, hopeful that they will actually keep, and it's not just about getting over the bar that one day and forget it the rest of their life. Anyway.
We have time for one more. Cindy?
Randy, I understand what you're saying, except for a couple of things that I've seen happen in school districts, particularly for seniors who submit at the end of their senior year and who don't know if they're graduating or not. And that is horrifically stressful for everybody, the kids, but every adult that knows that student is stressed for them. The other thing is a collection of evidence is still a test because it's graded by somebody outside of that system. It goes to the experts.
No,
You guys grade them yourself?
No, I'd say you change the law. You
Oh,
don't go
no,
to
I
the
meant,
state, you go to
okay,
the expert.
well, I meant now. Now, it's still a high stakes test graded by somebody else. And yes, your teachers who are highly qualified in this know what it is that's going to be looked for, help your kids be able to express it in a way that it's going to be seen for what they do know. It's probably, from what I've seen, more stressful than having the kids take the SBAC. Especially if they've already failed those tests as many as 5 times.
Okay. Holly, if you or go ahead. You quickly.
So I think the other difference, Randy, between thinking about the COE as just another course and thinking about another course as another course is that if you say the COE is the alternative, especially in small and rural districts where you have 5 students or 6 students taking the COE, you now have to staff that, right? right? So if you're saying, if, for example, when I taught collection of evidence biology, I had 5 students in my class, my district had to staff that. So when you say, well, if at the local level, teachers were assessing rather than having to ship it off to the state, it doesn't save you any money at all. What you've done is shift the cost of implementing the COE to the districts entirely, right? Because districts still, it doesn't save the district anything. They still have to have 0.15 teacher for 5 students or 3 students, right? As opposed to being able to take those 3 students or 5 students or 7 students and say we're going to put them into the next highest appropriate math course instead of saying COE is the specific option. And I think any kind of like designated course, you're shifting the costs to the local district.
Thank you. We're now going to move to the public comment area. I have one person signed up. Is there anyone else who would like to comment? Thank you all for your presentation. I apologize. Thank you. Appreciate that.